Well, I'm back. I'm back home, and I'm also back to my usual schedule of making videos and posting them for you all to enjoy. But also, I am back doing the Spoopathon. So, well, let's just get into it before too long. Hello, everyone. Britton here, also known as Samoki Dude, and I am back with another video of the Spoopathon. I am back from Florida, as I said before, but the book I'm going to be covering today is actually a comic book, one of my personal favorites, and one I've wanted to cover for a very long time now, and that is Wytches by Scott Snyder, I should say, not Zack Snyder. That would have been a much different book. But Scott Snyder and Jock, the great comic book artist. This is a book that came out in 2014. It says Volume 1 on here, but I do think this is a good standalone story, even without the... there hasn't been a follow-up yet, but, you know, we'll get into that. You know me. I love to ramble on. Let's get to the actual review, shall we? Now, one might say I am a fan of the horror genre. I would say that assertion is accurate. I definitely enjoy the horror genre, though I find I'm pickier with what horror I consume. I find that horror can be much harder to pull off in literature than it can be in a film or a video game, since it's not a visual medium. And much like with comedy, which I guess kind of makes sense because there have been horror directors who started out as comedy actors like John Krasinski or especially Jordan Peele, who's made such great stuff as Nope and Get Out and Us, though I generally prefer Get Out and Us more than Get Out and Nope. Sorry, I really like Nope. Us, I kind of felt short a little bit. But the point I'm saying is, much like with comedy, horror is one of the most subjective genres out there. I mean, really, what scares you is just utterly specific to the person. Just as much as what makes you laugh is very specific to the person. Not to say that there isn't a method to scare people. I mean, there have been dozens of great horror films that most people have agreed are excellent, but I find that it's much harder to pull off a effective horror story because, well, horror depends on the person. What scares someone what scares me is definitely different from what might scare someone else. Yet it's books like Wytches that reminds me why I love horror in the first place. And Scott Snyder, for my money, is comics' version of Stephen King. You heard it here first. Much like the master of horror, when Snyder is at his best, he could tap into what scares us, but also what brings us together. And coincidentally, I actually discovered Scott Snyder's work through Stephen King, because they had collaborated on American Vampire together, which is also a very fun series, though I don't hold it in as high of regard as this one. I find this one is the more effective horror story. I'd say that American Vampire is more pulp adventure, if you really want to go into it. With horror elements, there's some good horror elements in there, especially when the vampires are involved, and they actually do some interesting things with vampires in that series. But, you know, I'm getting ahead of myself again. But then I discovered his much-beloved Batman run, which really revitalized my interest in Big Two superhero comics, as well as reigniting my love for the Caped Crusader in comic book form. But here, I find we see Snyder working in the genre that he is most comfortable in, horror. Now, Wytches is my favorite horror comic of all time, so I can't pretend to be biased when discussing this book. I mean, my love for Wytches is unconditional, and I still find that it is Scott Snyder's best work to date. I can't really describe it, but he really tapped into something that was deeply personal and deeply primal, I might dare say, when creating this. And despite how creepy this book gets, and it definitely gets creepy for sure, there's a deeply heartfelt and compassionate message about human love buried within the pledges and the weird folk mythology that Wytches ends up creating. And Wytches is also just a damn fine yarn with nary a misstep in sight. Scott Snyder's Jock and Matt Hollingworth, the colorist of this series, create a world with a very unique mythology that reels you in slowly. And once you're sucked in, never let you go. As I said before, I find Snyder is the comics equivalent to Stephen King when he's at his best, but he's also a very attuned student of Stephen King in more ways than one. He takes the right notes from King on what scares people, while also adding his own spin to the genre. He definitely echoes Stephen King's thought on what the core of fear is, what we can't control. Things such as paranoia, loss, or mental illness, to cite some examples. Things that are far more powerful than just mere human insanity or even our insignificance to the cosmos. Sorry, Lovecraft. Snyder is absolutely peerless here, though. He takes a completely different tone and voice than in his usual work. He is much lighter in his touch in this book and doesn't overly, describe things or use the monologue paneling as he likes to do in some of his other works, like Batman, much of his DC work. I know he and even some of his indie work. He does do it a little bit in American Vampire, though, as well. But in this, he really lets the comic book medium complement the story that he's telling. He allows the artist to do as much of the work as his great writing does, which, that's what great comics should do. H.P. Lovecraft once wrote that you shouldn't call up what you can't put down. And in many ways, I find that's kind of what horror is all about. Well, really great horror anyway. Humans trifling with things that are best left alone. And that's really where Scott Snyder's story really starts with Wytches. For Snyder, horror for the sake of horror is utterly meaningless. True horror comes from somewhere within. Something dark within all of us. Whatever creature or monster exists in the world of horror really complements that core exploration into human nature that horror captures so well. After all, the Cthulhu mythos is basically H.P. Lovecraft's meditation, if you will, on his belief that ultimately human beings are insignificant in the cosmos. Kind of works the same way here, though without the cosmic indifference. This is a little more emotional stakes than what you might find in a H.P. Lovecraft story. Anyway, the Wytches, as are all creatures in horror stories, are a metaphor for human greed and arrogance. Christopher Rocchio once called horror the most moral genre, and it's stories like Wytches that show why. The bill will come due eventually, and no one is spared the consequences of their actions. But my favorite part of this book, aside from the stellar relationship drama, which I'll get into in a minute, it's actually the mythos that Snyder creates revolving around the Wytches. It's mysterious and strange enough where it becomes almost mythic and folkloric, and he wisely chooses to leave many questions open, even as he reveals answers to what the Wytches are and what they do. Snyder paces himself deliberately here, as he creates a tapestry of terror and ominousness. Anyway, and never misses a step. The Wytches aren't merely horrifying, though they definitely are. They're fascinating, and once you learn about them, you want to learn more, especially once you learn the history around them and how long this curse, whatever you want to call the Wytches, has been around and affected the place where our main characters live. Perhaps it is my own love for the small town with a curse trope speaking here, but I do find Snyder utilizes said tropes magnificently. It never feels like a cliche here, and the mythos that he makes is so fascinating, it becomes archetypal. Not to be missed in this book is the artwork of Jock, of course. Now, I will admit, the artwork, I was not initially fond of it. I thought it was kind of, I don't know, I thought it was kind of ugly, kind of splotchy, especially with the really splotchy, jerky colors of Matt Hollingworth. You can probably see it here. Hopefully you guys can kind of see the color. I know the screen doesn't always capture it very well, but I was not really I wasn't really fond of the artwork at first. It almost looked like a 3D movie, which kind of threw me off, but it took me a little while to really appreciate what they were trying to do here, and after several reads, the art in this book definitely grew on me. The definite uncanny valley of the Wytches. I'll see what I can show here. Like there's a mouth. I think the jerky, almost uncanny valley of some of the visuals of the story really makes this book what it is. Really makes this book engaging. on a very human level. And I find that the uncanny valley of the Wytches and just some of the stuff that happens here is actually complemented by Jock's jerky artwork and the splotchy colors from Hollingwood. And those splotchy colors really give this visceral, nasty atmosphere. I mean, just look at one of the pages here where he's just like slapping stuff on himself. Just like, or actually, hold on, let me find it. Look at that. Like, that is just disgusting. Like, that's why I think the art actually works in this case, because the artwork actually makes the atmosphere just seem really grungy and dirty and disgusting. It's I don't know how they did it. Like I said, it took me a while to really appreciate it, but I really liked how it actually contributes to the horror very well. I mean, there were moments that were just so viscous and, again, disgusting that I could literally smell and taste and even hear the sensations that Snyder introduces to the audience. I mean, you can't really do that very often in a comic book. And it's really Snyder and Jock working together to create this folkloric, deeply unsettling atmosphere that's appropriate to the best of horror, and what I think makes Wytches such a spooky delight. But even with all that, I find that Wytches is a deeply personal story from Scott Snyder, and it's often our most personal tales that speak the most to our audiences. And going back to King, Snyder also shares his distinct ability to create characters who are deeply compelling, but also feel achingly human. The relationship between Charlie and Sailor, that is, hold on, dang it. These two, the redheaded girl is Sailor, the guy with the glasses is Charlie. The relationship between both Charlie and Sailor is a very beautiful one, and I find that Charlie struggles to be a good dad to Sailor is one of the many is one that many people can relate to, and it's his attempts to overcome his own personal demons, his own insecurities, and traumas from the past that's explored in this. That's really what lies at the heart of Wytches, and really makes it stand out among other horror books of its kind. And much of the power from Wytches, aside from the very spooky atmosphere and very visceral violence, comes from the love that Charlie and Sailor have for each other, and how their selflessness and utter dedication to each other is anathema to the titular Wytches, and shows us that what hope can be found even in a world filled with monsters and ghouls. The power of love that we have for each other. Wytches, for my money, is Scott Snyder's ultimate triumph, and it's the one that I've compared every other one of the books of his that I've read since I first read this book. And even though Wytches works as a standalone story, there has been talk of a sequel for many years now, and since an adaptation is in the works, which, how the hell are you going to do that? I mean, well, actually, I think you could do that. This would make a really great, 2-hour flick if you really wanted to. But since the adaptation is in the works, slowly but surely, we may finally get it. I have heard of the Bad Egg one-shot that Snyder put out some years ago. I even almost picked it up when it first came out, but I just didn't get around to it. Probably should have. But I've yet to touch it. I haven't read it yet. But then again, now that I think about it, perhaps it is a good thing that we haven't gotten a sequel yet. I would much prefer reading Wytches on its own and wishing for a sequel, rather than getting a mediocre sequel and wishing that Scott and Jock had left it how it is. You know how it is with books that are quite nice when they stand on their own. And a great book, I think, should leave you wanting for more. So, yeah, that is all I have for today. That is the review I have for Wytches. I hope you guys enjoyed this review. Have any of you read Wytches? And if not, or if you have, what did you think of it? And if you haven't, what are you doing? It's the Halloween season. Pick this book up. It's not very long. It's a good 6 issues long. It'll take you an afternoon. It's a good Halloween read. Just give it a crack. It's a lot of fun. It's also really spooky as well. But anyway, social media. Yeah, I do that. Social media. You can find me on social media. You can find me on Twitter. You can also find me on Goodreads and Letterboxd, where I write reviews that are probably more coherent than the one you just heard right now. You can also find me on Instagram and Blue Sky. I'm starting to get the hang of Blue Sky. Yeah, like, comment, subscribe. As my friend John Minton likes to say, it feels good when you do it. And also comment. I love hearing from you guys. I really like to hear your thoughts on this. And if you all are interested in reading Wytches, well, I've done my job. That's all I really got to say. So anyway, hopefully you guys enjoyed this. And, well, until next time. See you guys later. May the spoopathon continue. See you guys later. Bye-bye.